I don't know if this is a feeling that you can relate to, but sometimes I just get like super bored of my bullet journal and I just need to change things up. So that is what this video is for, looking at a bunch of different ways that you can set up a monthly log that's, you know, outside of just a regular calendar. Though, spoiler alert, the first one is just a regular calendar. Anywho, that feels like enough from me, so let's just look at the inspo. Also, if you like seeing my face at the start of the video, let me know that too, because this is obviously not something we usually do. I say obviously. What if it's your first time here? Hi, welcome. Okay, back to the inspo. The ideas we have today, I have set up in my R&D bujo, or effectively a journal that I use to make spreads for my videos. This one is an A5 journal from Archer & Olive, so keep in mind that if you're using a different size journal, or if you're using even just a different brand of A5 journal, you may need to tweak the sizing of the spreads a little bit. For some of the monthly log ideas we have, I'll also be able to show you how I've used that style in my journals. But as promised, our first style is a regular calendar grid. Typically when I set up my calendar grids, I like to have them split across the 2 pages, so 4 days on one side, 3 days on the other, and not always 4 days on the left, but most of the time I do. Mainly because as a right-handed person, I find it kind of hard to write along this side of the page, so if I had my daily box over here, it would just be a little bit trickier. I typically like to have it that each of my daily boxes is 6 squares across and 6 squares down, which I find to be enough room to write in my events. In terms of the colour palette that I'm going for all of the spreads in this journal, these are all done with blues and greys with this blue astrology washi tape. But of course, a calendar like this can be made to fit any theme. So for example, this one, or this one, or this one. Can you tell this one's kind of my go-to? I use it a lot. Taking just the regular calendar grid layout though, there are several ways you can tweak it to make it your own, or make it fit whatever theme you're using. So if we flip over, one of the ways that you can tweak this is by separating the boxes out. So rather than drawing it as a grid, drawing separate boxes that make a grid, if that makes sense. As we talked about, you can also change the decoration, so here I've just used capital initials for each of the days of the week, and to write the numbers into the boxes, instead of putting them in the corner, I've made it take up the majority of the box, but just used a really light colour, so I could write over that. While the space on the side you could just use for decoration, here I've used it for a to-do list, but you could put in a habit tracker, a goals or projects list, really anything that you want. I think that these separate boxes is super cute. The way that I've laid this one out is with 5 by 5 boxes, but you can of course change the spacing of those, like what we've got here. In this one, instead of having 4 boxes on the left and 3 boxes on the right, I've spread it across the entire of the page, so the boxes for Thursday lay across the center of the spread. This isn't for everybody, not everybody likes to write across the spine of their journal, but if it doesn't bother you, it's a really good way to maximize your space. Flipping over, another way that we can tweak it is, instead of drawing out a full grid, just drawing out the corners of the boxes. So here we still have a calendar layout, but rather than ruling in all of the grid lines, we've only drawn in the corners. This way you can still easily see where each of the days are, but the layout looks a little bit more open because you don't have the full black lines. When setting up this one, I just freehanded the lines because they're fairly short, so it's also a good option for if you don't want to use a ruler. Another example of this one is the layout we have here. But what if you still want a calendar grid with even less lines? In that case, you could just put in the header bars rather than drawing in the vertical lines. So here you can see we have each week going across, just like we had in the grid, but we don't have any of those vertical lines separating each day. When using this one, you do have to be mindful not to accidentally start writing out your event and go into the next day. But I do think that these types of layouts can look really visually effective. This is another style that I've used a couple of times in my journal, but sometimes you may want to use a layout that has a calendar, but you don't really want it to take up a full spread, so just be housed on one page. In that case, I do have some examples for that too. So our first one here has the mini calendar at the top. Each of these boxes is 3 by 3. And because you can't really write your events in those boxes, we instead have an events list at the bottom. What you could do is put in a little icon or a little colored dot, and then have that correspond to the list at the bottom. On this side I put a task list, but if you had more events that you wanted to record, you could just have an extended events list. This is very much akin to the style I've been using in Rachel's journal, with examples of this one, and it's also the style that I'm using in my monthly setup for April. For our next example, this one actually requires you to rotate your journal, but for this one you can see we have still fit the entire calendar grid in, but we just have it on the one page. Because if you're using square boxes, a calendar is wider than it is tall, This does mean we actually have to flip the book to be able to view it in the correct orientation. In terms of the spacing that I have for this one, each of these boxes is 5 by 5, so there is a small space at the top where I could write in the days of the week, but I've just left them off this one. Another example of this style is the one we have here, and this one. But what if rotating your journal isn't something you really want to do? Instead, what you can have is actually just flipping the calendar itself. So rather than reading the calendar across, so Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, etc., this one reads it down, so Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, etc. We're still working with the 5 by 5 boxes here, but you don't have to rotate your journal to write in any of your events or read what you've already written in. This one's a little bit different, you don't typically see it, but it is one that I have used previously. Another idea we have that features the calendar grid, but this time a lot smaller, is the one we have on the right here. So we have the calendar grid at the top to show you which days are on which days of the week. So the first on Friday, the second on Saturday, etc. But the rest of the page is broken down into different sections, and what these sections are really up to you. It depends on what's important to you and what you're trying to keep track of. The examples I've put in here are an important section, so things that are happening in the month that are important to keep in mind, a task list, an events list, a section for anything that's coming up next month that you need to be mindful of, and a space for notes. Of course, any of these sections can be changed out for something different, including decoration or a different type of list. Moving into our next style of monthly log, and this is the vertical style. The first one we have is essentially just the one that they use for the original bullet journal method, where you write out a list for the numbers for the days of the month, and then follow that with their initials. I've done mine a little bit decoratively, so I have a decorative header here. Again, just an example, you do not have to use that style of lettering. This is the style that I very much used when I first started bullet journaling, because I kind of felt like it was the way you had to do it. There's nothing wrong with this style, it works perfectly fine if your brain works this way, and as you can see we have a couple of examples of how I've used it previously. Another style of vertical log we have here is that instead of putting your numbers along the side of the page, you put it in the middle to make two separate columns. Those columns could just be a decorative choice, so nothing really special about either side of the page, but as you can see here I've labelled mine as work and home. So any work events would go on the left, and any home events would go on the right. You can of course expand this to be across a full spread as well, so maybe looking at 2 additional categories, or you could break it up based on time of the day. So all day events, morning, afternoon, and evening. One of the things that people sometimes complain about with the vertical style is not actually having enough space to write in everything that's going on. So one of the ways you can combat this is by making it a full spread and giving yourself 2 lines for each day of the month, effectively doubling your space. You can have the sections on both sides of the page aligned, but I made the stylistic choice to have them misaligned, just so I could put some decoration into each of the corners. Of course, you don't have to fill these sections with decoration. You could put in a little list section, have a space to write in things that are coming up next month, a mini habit tracker, whatever you want. Remember, everything we have here are just ideas. You need to tweak it so that it suits you. This isn't a style that I've used previously as a monthly log, but it is a style that I have used for 2 lines a day, or effectively a spread where you write 2 lines about what happened in the day. That's also worth mentioning. You can change what these layouts are for. They don't have to be monthly logs. You can use them as inspiration for different types of spreads. Flipping over, we have another example of the vertical style, but instead of just being a monthly log, this one has a section for a habit tracker as well. So I've written out what each of the habits are. I've written them out in words, but you could use icons. And then underneath each of these, I can mark off whether I did or didn't complete that habit on whichever day of the month. This type of spread is what I would call a combo tracker. So you're tracking your habits, but also keeping track of when your events are. I do have a separate video for other examples of this style of spread, or other examples of combo trackers. That one, along with any of the other related videos, is linked in the description box. Our next example for the vertical style is similar to the one we had with the 2 columns, where one column meant work stuff and one column meant home stuff, but the way you fill this one out is a little bit different. Rather than just writing beside any number what's happening on that day of the month, in this one we have these little lines that come off our center panel so that you can write the events anywhere along the side. It's not necessarily as easy to read, but it does end up looking pretty cool. Flipping over, and we have one that works along the same principle, but in a much different style, and this one is a circular monthly log. In this one we have a ring at the center that has the numbers for the days of the month, and again you just draw lines coming off this to label what your events are. So for example, this line coming up is attached to the first day, so something that's happening on the first of the month, you'd follow the line up to here and write in what that event is. Something that's happening on the second, etc. When you start the month, this would just be the ring in the middle of the page, and you draw the lines off as you add your events in. So rather than going and putting the lines in to start with. I've just drawn the lines in here so you can kind of see what I mean. Another example of a circular-based monthly log is the one we have over here, which I like to call the Sunshine monthly log, which you can probably tell why. In this one we just have a segment radiating from our center circle for each day of the month. And honestly, setting these ones up is really challenging, but once you do it, it looks very visually effective. Thankfully, if you're one of my patrons, you get a tracker like this every month with the correct number of days for that month, where everything is perfectly evenly sectioned. Obviously, this one is not perfectly evenly sectioned, but here's an example of this style of layout that I used for a gratitude log. Once it's filled in, it looks pretty cool. Not that I completely filled this one in, but you get the idea. Flipping over, and we have a style of monthly log that I certainly don't see very often, because this one has a box for each day of the month, but it's not done to a calendar grid. Instead, the boxes are just evenly distributed on the page, so for this one we have each box being 4 squares down by 6.5 across, just so that it fills the entire of the page, minus the little decorative elements we have. This style of monthly log is very much for the people who don't so much need to know what day of the week something is happening on, but really just care about what day of the month it's happening on. Not a style that I've used previously for a monthly log, but I have done similar things for other types of pages. For example, the memories page we have here, my daily doodle pages I've done previously, that kind of stuff. Coming into our final stretch of ideas here, you'll see that these ones get a little bit more eclectic. They're not so grouped like our calendar style ones and our vertical style ones. This one is another type of vertical style one, but it combines itself with a mini calendar. The nice part about combining the list view with the mini calendar is that you can easily see which days of the month fall on which day of the week. I know we have the initials here as well, but sometimes you just like the visual. And then we also have space for these little lists as well. For instance, goals, tasks. You could put down important things that you're tracking, decoration, whatever you like. This is a style that I've used previously as well, so for example this one, which was also done in April, or this one here. For the one we have here, this one is kind of similar to the circular style we had a couple of pages back, where you have the circle in the middle and then have lines coming off it to say what's happening when. But for this one we just have the title in the middle of the page and then lines coming off of this, and you include the day number in the label. So for example, for this person, they have Games Day on the 2nd, they have Bujo Wednesday on the 6th, and on the 14th, the term ends. This may or may not be based on an actual person. This style's probably best suited for people who don't have a whole heap of events going on in any given month, but can still be a nice way to summarize those events that they do have. For this next one, this is a style that I have not seen very often. This one was very much inspired by Isabel Hoops over on Instagram. This is another style that would require you to turn your journal to write in your events and read any events that you've got, but it has each day arranged vertically. So the first and the events for the first, the second, the events for the second, so on and so forth. You could position this one differently so that it's a little bit lower and you have space for a header at the top, or you could just expand this so that it takes up more of the page. For the journal I'm working in, because there are 26 boxes across, I wasn't able to fit the entire month across the page, but if you're working in a bigger journal, you may be able to do this. For our next idea, I couldn't possibly do this video without having a Dutch door, so for this one we have this little tip-in, which, as you can see, flips from side to side. On one side we've got the events list for the month, so labelled 1 through 30. On the other side, we have a space to write out what their mood is, or they could maybe put in a word of the day, or write in a little note about what happened. And then on this side here, we have a habit tracker. For this habit tracker, I've used icons rather than writing out what the habits are. I love tip-ins. I think they're a great way to maximize space in your spreads. So we have a monthly log that's still only one page, but it has an events list, a task list, a mood tracker, and a habit tracker. Again, I've opted in for decoration rather than a header, but you could of course fit one in. And we have that mini calendar so you can easily see which day of the month is on which day of the week. I love this style, I think it's super cute, but I would be curious to hear about which style of monthly log you found the most interesting. If the tip-in in particular intrigues you, you may really enjoy my video on tip-ins and how to use them in your journal. That one's linked on the screen here. But as always team, thank you for watching, and until next time, bye!